H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu, for beginning readers, by R.J. Ivankovic. The most merciful thing in the world is, I think, that the mind is unable to connect and link all the disparate pieces of things that we know, and thus learn of the horrors that lurk down below. The professor who died so unfortunately when a rough-looking sailor pushed him carelessly was my great-uncle George, so my interest was spurred. In the winter of late 26 this occurred. The locals whispered that they did not believe the story that doctors were forced to conceive. When they could not explain why the old man had died, it was just his old heart, the physicians had cried. As George Angel's sole heir and his last relative, I reviewed all the research for which he had lived. It had fallen to me to clear up his affairs, and I there found a thing to which nothing compares. On a night when nightmares turned to horror and pain in the restless slumbers of the weird and insane, had a sculptor, one Wilcox, carved visions of grief above mad hieroglyphics, all in bas relief. It was March 25 when the sculpture was carved, and in carving it, Wilcox's sanity halved. So the sculptor had visited Angel to find any clues to the visions that crowded his mind. Although Angel initially had shown some doubt, he had become convinced when he later found out that the words Wilcox heard were Cthulhu Fatan. Then he knew something big was about to happen. You see, Angel had once heard these two words before, so he took out a key and he opened the drawer where he kept his most secret of research results in a secret old file marked with Cthulhu Cult. The professor asked Wilcox to write down his dreams, and for most of that month he had done that, it seems, but then Wilcox stopped writing what he'd seen and heard. He had fallen unconscious on March 23rd. After April the 2nd, no visions occurred. I imagined that Wilcox's hoax was exposed, and thus it appeared the strange case could be closed. I believed that my research had met an impasse. Then I picked up a file on Inspector Legrasse. When I read through the pages of file number 2, I learnt more than a little of what Angel knew. The most recent events had come really quite late, as this tale had begun back in 1908. Academics, explorers, and other great minds were discussing their archaeological finds when Legrasse had presented a stone statuette. Then, with questions from experts, Legrasse was beset. Just one of the members who were there assembled could think of a thing that the thing there resembled. A respected old man who had studied Greenland and had there seen a similar idol first hand. It was in 1860, and out in the snow the young Webb had encountered some fell Esquimaux. He phonetically copied their guttural cries, and Legrasse knew them too, to the expert's surprise. It was only last year that he'd first heard the phrase. In a dark southern swamp it was shouted in praise, the inspector amazed by translating its meaning. In his house at Relier dead Cthulhu lies dreaming. With these simple words he unhid what was hidden, and opened the door to a thing long forbidden. In the swamps there are squatters way out in the trees, and these squatters were gripped by a growing unease. There were rumours of men who avoided the light and who entered their homes in the midst of the night. The police were informed that these men were around when some women and children could then not be found. So 20 men into the dark ventured bravely, and not one man laughed. No, they all ventured gravely. Of course, even policemen will freeze where they stood when they hear tom-toms beating out deep in the wood. The policemen kept silent, no one said a word, though the drums brought to mind all the stories they'd heard of the paths that explorers neglected to take, that lead into the swamp, then out to a lake. A dark lake which is home to a polypus thing, to which devils at midnight shout praises and sing. It is needless to say they'd not followed those trails, so then let us get back to Legrasse's travails. When the officers spotted an ominous glare, they could not yet imagine what would be found there. When they pushed through some branches and into a glade, they had witnessed what madness looks like on parade. They discovered it too late to save the kidnapped, and on seeing this sight, some policemen had snapped. When they regained their senses, the law charged ahead. Then some men were arrested, and others shot dead. When Legras got his captives back into the town, some mentioned great old ones that live underground. They'd arrived here on earth when the stars were just right, falling out the sky, coming in from the night. Great Cthulhu had led them from some other place when the great old ones came from across outer space. For a time at some humans they'd psychically screamed up until Relier sank. Now they wait there and dream. In the Necronomicon, though easy to miss, the mad Arab Alhazred had referenced this, writing that is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may yet die. Most convicts kept silent, kept their secrets their own, for some parts of their faith were for their ears alone. So extracting this knowledge was no easy task. It was not just as simple as having to ask. A mestizo named Castro had told them the most of immortal Chinese and undead off the coast. Of the statements from Castro, one should be most feared. When the stars in the night sky have rightly appeared, then the old ones are able to rise once again. But the cultists alone are the ones who know when. The cult's insights are secret, so none understand. They will kill and spread chaos across distant lands. They'll awaken great old ones with terrible prayers, who will spill from below while our sanity tears. Legras's tale closed not with answers but questions. To keep up the silence was someone's suggestion, and in secret the men there could then correspond. I convinced myself Angel still might have been conned. I held on at that time to some feelings of doubt. I still wondered if Wilcox had found out about the professor's strange research and contacts worldwide. After visiting him, I was sure he'd not lied. Although Castro had died shortly after his trial, I'd managed to stop with Legras for a while. With the cultists and idol, he was still obsessed. When I saw it, I likewise had become possessed. I imagined that I'd receive grandeur and fame for revealing religions that had gone unnamed, but with little to go on I put it aside till a foreign newspaper, by chance, I espied. The old paper recounted the Emma's sad tale. She'd encountered some storms when from Auckland she'd sailed. They had then met a ship which had ordered them back. When the crew had refused, the Alert had attacked. Though the Emma was sunk, still her crew won the battle. Then they sailed into something that left the men rattled. Only crewman Johansson returned from the sea with the idol in hand, quite mysteriously. The part of it all that most piqued my attention, and is to this day beyond my comprehension, the sailors were lost at exactly the time that young Wilcox's nightmares invaded his mind. So I sought out Johansson to hear what he'd say, through New Zealand, Australia, and then through Norway. But his grief-stricken widow had answered the door. Poor Johansson had died just a few months before. Then Johansson's widow gave me his diary. It described in English what he'd seen out at sea. He had thus spared his wife. I now wish he'd spared me from the tale of his sighting strange geometry. Poor Johansson had written with unsteady hand when recording what happened to he and his band. They had chanced on a city that came from the depths. Though the crew did not know, I knew it was Relier. The crew rowed to the shore, and the men were amazed by the mad architecture the ocean had raised. Through a stinking miasma, a staircase there ran with its steps not designed for a regular man. They had then clambered skyward to find souvenirs, but no treasures worth taking in that place appeared. So they climbed even higher to dizzying heights, while their minds were assaulted by abnormal sights. At the top of their climb they had found a great door that was not for certain in the wall or the floor. At a sailor's light touch the great portal swung wide, and a tenebrous shadow leaked out from inside. When a nasty wet slopping oozed up from below, they experienced something man's not meant to know. 2 men died where they stood as their minds simply broke. 'Twas a merciful fate when Cthulhu awoke. As Cthulhu had paused, but they knew not for what, so Johansen and Bryden got back to the yacht. That the boiler was boiling had pleased them indeed, but with limited steam they would sail at half speed. Bryden saw great Cthulhu slide into the foam. This had broken his mind, and he did not get home. Though Johansen had planned to make full steam and flee, it was clear that Cthulhu would catch them at sea. The brave sailor then turned the Alert right around until towards Cthulhu the vessel was bound. On Cthulhu's great head it appeared they would ground, but the bow pierced his brow with a horrible sound. Through Cthulhu's great head the Alert had then ploughed, thus releasing an acrid and stinking green cloud. When Johansen looked back, the foul thing was reforming, but Alert steamed away, with her boiler performing. Then the sailor had drifted till Vigilant called. His adventure there ended. For now, that was all. The ship Vigilant sailed past where Relier should be, but the city had sunk back beneath the deep sea, and I guess that Cthulhu lies waiting there still, his existence maintained by the strength of his will. For Johansen, death ended his mad misery, and I know, just like Angel, it soon comes for me. I've discovered too much of what man should not know, and the cultists are out there, somewhere, spreading woe. I've uncovered the truth of the strange bas-relief and Johansen's account of things beyond belief. Now I'm packing up all these things in a box, the small box that was Angel's, that closes and locks. If you value your life, you'll leave it all there, and with all my papers, please exercise care. All these terrible truths I now beg you, don't share, for with these cosmic horrors our psyches can't bear. Found among the papers of the late Francis Wayland Thurston of Boston.